battle to retake Mosul, seized by Islamic State in 2014, began in October when Iraqi troops, Shia militias and Kurdish Peshmerga advanced on the jihadists' last major urban stronghold in Iraq. Fierce ISIS resistance and concern for civilians, however, stalled the operation, casting doubts on the swift liberation that Baghdad and coalition strategists had hoped for. Speaking to RT, Baroness Nicholson, chair of the Ammar Foundation and Britain's trade envoy to Iraq, says Mosul's already traumatized civilians now face a humanitarian emergency.
ISIL, the Islamic State, they've captured and kidnapped a lot of people, some of them already residents of Mosul, others not residents of Mosul. And they're really using them as human sacrifices. They're using them to demonstrate their extreme cruelty, and they're using cruelty to cow a resident population into submission and to frighten away others. They're also using cruelty to attract global sadists who come to practice their sadism. And there's a small proportion of the human race that are born sadists, sadly, or born without any understanding of inflicting pain on others. They don't have that feeling in them. So it's not really human shields that are being used. I'm sorry to say it's basically human sacrifices. And those people will probably die. But many others will escape. And we must save as many lives as possible in the Ammar Foundation. They will pour out of Mosul, traumatized, some of them having been bombed, some of them having lost limbs, and there may be 1.5 million people in that condition. So inevitably there's going to be a huge amount of damaged humans. Ammar specializes in that. That's exactly why we exist, is to help people when they're in desperate situations and to patch them up as fast as possible, save their lives and get them into secure locations. That's exactly what we've been doing in Iraq, I'm sorry to say, since 1991, when the victims were those of Saddam Hussein. So the fall of Mosul is a terrifying prospect for the inhabitants of Mosul, and Ammar has to be ready to save as many lives as possible.
Well, it depends on the definition of defeat. So people are thinking that ISIS will be defeated due to military circumstances or the fact that they'll be operationally defeated in Mosul. I don't think any ISIS field commander is seriously expecting to be able to actually hold Mosul itself.
Talha Abdul Razak, a researcher at the University of Exeter Strategy and Security Institute, believes military planners rushed into the battle. Although the jihadists are vastly outnumbered, Iraqi troops could find themselves bogged down.
The odds are insurmountable in that sense. So you have, according to US estimates, about 5,000 to 6,000 ISIS fighters in and around the city of Mosul. And on the other hand, you have a coalition of about up to 100,000 troops, Shia militias, Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi security forces, federal police, so on and so forth. So I'm fairly certain that what Baghdadi was saying in terms of no retreat, that's for the absolute hardcore who will remain in the city. Even and when they do lose the city, that doesn't necessarily spell defeat for them. An ISIS victory is also something else we need to define, because a defeat for them could be them, for example, if there's a political component to this military strategy, then you could have an ISIS defeat. But an ISIS victory would look like them holding onto the city past the new year. Because Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has said that, I'm going to be liberating Mosul by the end of 2016. So he's already set himself a time limit. So what we have to look at here is, was this militarily planned or was this politically planned? So in my opinion, they rushed into the Mosul operation for political objectives as opposed to, soundly thought out military strategy.
Atrocities committed against civilians by Islamic State are well documented, but new evidence indicates torture and murder are not confined to jihadist ranks. Amnesty International researcher Dina El-Tahawi recently uncovered evidence of Iraqi federal police apparently executing Sunni Arab villagers in revenge for ISIS attacks.
In one particular incident, on the 21st of August, we have found that armed men wearing federal police uniforms have tortured and killed at least 6 villagers in the south of Mosul on suspicion that they might have had links with the armed group calling itself the Islamic State. According to information that we have, these were villagers who had stayed behind while fighters had moved the majority of the civilian population out of the area. So Iraqi forces present on the ground appear to have been suspicious that anyone who remained behind might have been a fighter. But these are individuals who did not pose any threat. They were villagers who handed themselves over to the Iraqi forces, who carried white flags and who lifted their shirts to show that they didn't have explosive belts. And after that, they were beaten, they had their beards pulled and in one case burned, before a group of them were taken aside and shot dead.
The revelations do not bode well for Sunni and Shia reconciliation after Mosul is retaken.
The Mosul situation is basically one of civil war, and that civil war started in 2003 when those people in Mosul who were in fact Saddam's crack troops, they were his officers, they were his police officers, they were the people who kept Iraq in order for him, Sunnis in fact, irrespective of anything else. And they were turfed out by the change of power in 2003 when democracy came in, because democracy gives the majority rule. And the majority in religious terms in Iraq are actually Shiites. But whoever they are in religious terms, they weren't the Mosulites. They weren't those same people who had been in power for so long.
The issue here is that after 2008, the Maliki government marginalized the Sunni Arab community. So right now the Sunni Arab community are thinking, why should we put our necks out on the line only for you to revert back to your sectarian policies? So even with Daesh being defeated, and even, considering they have a lack of support amongst the vast majority of Sunni Arabs have no interest in fighting them because, frankly, they see the Iraqi government and, to a lesser degree, the Peshmerga units who are doing this, raising homes in Kirkuk, they see them as being the same as Daesh or ISIS, not any better. But if we restore equal rights to all Iraqis, whether they're Kurdish Sunnis, whether they're Arab Sunnis, whether they're Shia Arabs, whether they're Shia Turkoman or Shia Sunnis, it doesn't really matter. As long as they're treated equally as Iraqi citizens, we will have a solution to Daesh. Right now, that doesn't exist.
If you like it, I see this current military campaign as a short, sharp shock. It has foreign troops there, US people, British people, other people, Iranian troops. It has all sorts of good quality, highest level military people directing this campaign or participating in it. I see that as a short, sharp shock. The question is, how will Iraq cope with the aftermath of a totally unresolved civil war?
So the best case scenario is for the Iraqi military, including the Popular Mobilization Forces and the tribal militias, to stop any and all atrocities right now, because if they manage to get the civilians on board, if people of Mosul and the Iraqi community, the Sunni Arab community especially, manage to see that this is different from Fallujah, this is different from Tikrit, this is different from Jurf al-Sakhar and all these other areas where atrocities have been committed, there's a chance at some kind of reconciliation. But that's very unlikely to happen, so I'm afraid all I have for you is a worst case scenario, and that atrocities continue, sectarian rule is restored over the city of Mosul, and the threat of Daesh doesn't disappear. It remains because they have no partners on the ground who are able to effectively neutralize them, as happened in 2008 with Al-Qaeda.
The best case scenario would be if the vile Baghdadi drops down dead, as it were, and all his people run away. The question is where they run to. The worst case scenario is when they run into the undergrowth and they become sleepers in different cities and towns and tribes and villages throughout Iraq, and in that sense never give up. The best case scenario is when they disappear in a puff of green smoke and all end up in court. That would be my best scenario. Justice and the rule of law.